Very pleased to be joined by our next guest. She is Canadian skeleton athlete, Grace Dafoe. Grace, how are you today?
I'm good, thanks. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for doing this. I really do appreciate it. First question, starting with the hard-hitting stuff. Skeleton athlete, skeletoner, skeletony? How do skeleton athletes get identified?
Uh, Skeleton athletes generally what it is. Sometimes we get skeleton racer, skeletor,
Mm.
if someone really is a fan of the cartoon. But yeah, athlete slider sometimes as well. We really
Okay.
take anything.
Okay, that's fair. So a lot to cover with you today, but the main, I guess, talking point is the main talking point. It seems like on planet Earth right now, and that is Simone Biles' decision to, I guess, pull herself out of an Olympic competition, citing mental health issues. I guess first of all, your reaction to her doing that on the grandest stage that sport has to offer.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching her obviously in the USA gymnastic trials leading up to, I'm a big sports fan, obviously. And it's pretty shocking. I wasn't watching live when I got the notification, and I thought she had actually pulled out of the whole Olympics. And I was like, wow, this is insane. So, I mean, when I scaled back and learned more, I was like, okay, she just pulled herself out of the final, the team final, and which is fine because they have enough people obviously in the team. And I had watched the USA gymnastics selections, and I was like, wow, like they have a ton of great athletes. So I mean, all I have to say is that like I commend her for doing that and choosing her over the competition, because since then I've seen so many athletes coming out and saying like, there were times when I was struggling and I still went through with my competition, and a lot of them seem to end up with like, I did this, or I hurt myself, or
Mhm.
I set myself back kind of. And I don't really think a lot of people had those conversations. So I think she really started a movement, but at the bottom of it is that before going into Tokyo, she's the greatest of all time in gymnastics. She's one of the greatest athletes outside of gymnastics of all time. She didn't really need the Tokyo aspect to, you know, catapult herself further
Mhm.
into fame per se. She's doing it for herself. So I mean, I thought it was a good way for her to like leave a legacy in sport as well, and just take care of herself. And I know a lot of athletes are, struggling, and there's mental health support at the games with like certain countries and stuff like that. And I just think she's the one talking about it,
Mm-hmm.
really.
Yeah, and that conversation is one that has really started much more here over the last little while. And yeah, like there's just so many different ways to branch off of that. And I think it's almost like she's a victim of her own success, because you see what she does, and there is not another human being on the planet who can do what she does. And if that's off even a touch, whether it be something mental, something physical, anything, like she could end up legitimately hurting herself and altering the course of the rest of her life. So even just from that standpoint, and there are obviously layers to this, but just from a pure athletics, I probably don't want to land on my neck standpoint. It's if you're not 100% mentally there, that's a problem.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I can speak to that in my own sport where we're going 130 something
Right.
kilometers an hour. But she did pull out of like pop her vault or whatever it is. She was supposed to do 2.5 rotations, and she did a rotation and a half. And Kyle Schufelt was commentating on CBC, and he said, I don't think the general population realizes how much of a safety hazard that is. That she only landed it because she is the greatest in the world. That so many other people would have, landed elsewhere and maybe caused injury. So she caught it because she is the best in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But I like, to my naked eye, I didn't see an issue with it.
Right.
But he really brought it to light, and Kyle Schufelt did a great job of reiterating that, I thought, on the Canadian broadcast.
Yeah, quick aside, how good is he? Like, oh, he is so good at a lot of the Olympic commentators, because again, you're talking about sports that people don't necessarily follow for 4 years, and you have to be smart enough that you get the point across to the people who are pretending to be experts for 5 minutes, but also not be insulting to the people who actually know what's going on. How good is he at these, though?
He's so good. And you know what? The diving tube, Hartley, she's amazing. I think one good thing is that obviously not everyone is on the ground in Tokyo. So
Right.
they've been able to bring in these people and go live on location from basically the nearest CBC studio. And they've really been able to bring in the experts and you know, I remember watching in the past, and some of the feeds online weren't commentated, and now I was watching canoe kayak, and they're commentated by someone who really knew their stuff, and I was really impressed.
Yeah. Back to the Simone Biles conversation. You mentioned in your answer that there was a lot of athletes who said like, yeah, I've felt this before and it has led to X, Y, and Z, and generally Y and Z aren't very good. How important is it to have these conversations now? Because a lot of times in sports, it has been you just nose to the grindstone, rub some dirt on it, and this is the mental toughness with which we hold every athlete to, so that they can grind through and be better than everyone else. And it's like, well, nope, still definitely human beings. How important is it to kind of have this almost humanizing conversation?
Well, I really think like people look up to athletes, and I think that obviously our society as a whole, we need to keep pushing the mental health conversation outside of sport further. And I do think by people that, you know, kids are growing up idolizing are coming out and saying these things. Like, I think it's really important for them to realize like, wow, that person's the best in her sport, like of all time, but she still struggles sometimes. And
Right.
it's like, it does humanize them, but it also, it just, to me, I think is like more of a comforting as a fellow athlete, as myself as well. You're like, wow, okay, like they're the best at their, and they're the top of their game, but some days they're not. And you know, I think it also for, I think it benefits everyone, but as an
Yeah.
athlete myself, you're like, okay, great, like there, I'm not the, you know, you're not the only one. You don't feel as alone in that sense. And I think it's really good for the next generation who are
Mhm.
watching these games, and maybe they'll grow up being a little bit more open about it.
Yeah, like I've past radio career talked about my mental health things, and one of the things that I've tried to focus on is like every time you think there's a checkpoint where it's like, okay, this is going to happen, and then I'm going to get through this, and everything's going to be fine. The weight's going to be off, and everything's going to be lovely, and it's going to be awesome. And then I get to that, and then there's something else, and then there's something else. And I think a lot of people assume, whether it be professional athletes like Kevin Love and DeMar DeRozan, those guys are making more money than I'll ever be able to imagine in my life, and they still have these struggles. And Simone Biles is the greatest in the history of what she does, and she still has these struggles. And it just, I think it kind of shows like mental health does not discriminate. It's not just for people living on the street or whatever. It is the people at the highest tippy top of whatever mountain they choose to climb.
Yeah, nailed it with that. I totally agree. It doesn't discriminate.
Mm-hmm. Who does discriminate are some people on social media. Awkward segues. What has your reaction been to the reaction? Yeah, I think I said that right. What's your reaction been to some people's negative reaction on Simone Biles? Because there has been a shocking and disheartening amount of negative feedback online.
Yeah, and I definitely think that maybe not necessarily everyone understood it in the first 24 hours. I think after the last few days, it's settled down a little bit more in terms of, you know, people fully understanding what happened, and like the versus when it was happening. And I think we live in this world now where it's happening and people are tweeting from all over the world while it's happening, and you know they're, so it's almost like a blessing and a curse, because rumors start to fly, things circulate, they don't know what it is. She's walking off the floor and people are tweeting like, what's wrong with her? And then I found it really interesting, the commentator said like, they came back, they're like, oh, she doesn't appear to have anything physically wrong with her, but then she took off her wrist guards, and like, oh, she must be, you know, not returning. But they didn't really speculate, and I really did appreciate that, at least on the Canadian feed. Again, shout out to them, because they did a great job.
Mm-hmm.
I can't speak for necessarily some of the NBC or the other media. You never know what they're saying, but yeah, it was disheartening a bit as another athlete, just to see
Mm-hmm.
how instantaneously people just went like right for her throat. And like, I just literally before this was reading another athlete from the States, not in her sport, but like a past athlete, and was saying like how nice of her to win a medal while she took a back seat and let her team do all the work. And I said in my head right before this, I'm like, that is a horrible take, because she has carried the whole USA gymnastics team through an era that was obviously one of the full of terrible abuse with
Mm-hmm.
USA gymnastics and Larry Nassar and all that stuff. And like, she has carried everyone through that era, and she burdened all of that, I almost feel like. And it got to be, it seems like it to be too much. So yeah, I think the American media, I saw one guy calling her a heartless sociopath, and that we should be ashamed that she's mentoring the next generation, which I completely, as I said, disagree.
Right.
And he also said that she brought shame to America by letting the Russians win. And I was like, again, she doesn't exist solely to represent the USA. She exists as a human.
Yeah.
She happens to be on Team USA, which is her work. But when you start to say like you exist solely for that, no matter what your job is, it's never going to end well. So yeah, I mean, it's just, I think you just got to take a second before you become a keyboard warrior. Ronda Rousey said it best, I think. She said, you're on Twitter, she's on the Olympic team. So
yeah,
take a step back.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, like I sometimes get too nervous to play video games. So I can't imagine like the Olympic stage and then on top of it, like you said, like it almost felt like these games needed her more than she needed them in terms of everything that's gone on with US gymnastics over the last, I mean, really over the last forever, but specifically over the last couple of years. And then like it has not been a positive Olympics so far press wise. And so that it kind of needed a Simone Biles to be larger than all of these problems. And again, when she said, I'm doing this for people other than myself, like that, for whatever reason, that really hit home. Because like you said, like there is so much on her plate anyway, that no wonder she's having some issues.
Yeah, I mean, and I think anyone can say when sometimes when you spread yourself too thin, that's when you start to get stressed and get into that. So I mean, I won't speculate what she's going through, but I there was a lot, and I agree it might have been too much outward pressure, and right. I can say that I can't even imagine the internal pressure she has sitting on. I don't know if a lot of people realize how much internal pressure some athletes put on themselves, and that in itself, when compounded with the external pressure, can just be like, it can be crushing. And obviously I've never been to the games, so I can't even speak to the level, but I do know that I hold myself to a very high standard, and I'm very hard on myself. And also, so I know we're our worst critics, and sometimes, so I feel for her, and I just think that she took on the burden too of that like media, and she's got the emoji right for the hashtag emoji right before the games and stuff like that, like just perfect storm. But I have to say, like, shout out to her for recognizing. She said she didn't want to screw it up for her team, and she trusted in her team, which I think is really cool for her to know. They won a silver medal, which is not disappointing, I know USA said, oh, they had to settle for silver, but like other countries didn't even make the final, so and they're
like,
still happy.
Do you understand what silver means? That means second best on this planet. Like that it's not like at your whatever rec league where you finished second out of 4 teams of a bunch of 35-year-olds. Like this is second on planet the world.
Yeah, and I think obviously athletes are going to be a little bit disappointed if they knew that they could do better, as speaking to internal pressure, like I said. But yeah, when you put it in that perspective, you're like, wow, I made it to the Olympics, especially in a sport like gymnastics in the States. You have to beat out so many people, and then you have to be selected to the team and all this stuff, like to make it to that and still get a silver medal. And it's just, I think, incredible. And I, like anyone training for the Olympics or Paralympics or any high level sport, like it is hard, and it's a lot of work, and it's a grind and all this stuff. And we just need to extend a little more grace to these people, I think.
Yeah. Well, and another aspect of this that I've never been able to wrap my head around and never will be able to wrap my head around, like everything is peaking toward this one moment, right? And in her case, like she has been fortunate enough that this isn't her first go around, but still, like as you said, like this is a level you would like to get to, and it is like 4 years really, but an entire lifetime comes down to a couple of moments. Like from that aspect of things, that has to be incredibly grinding, I guess, as well.
Yeah, and it is like, we're constantly I speak for my own self, but we have 2 training camps this summer before we head into on ice Canadian selection races. And those testing camps are like, they set out a certain number of tests, like sprint, triple jump, etc., long jump, certain number of tests, and like all eyes are on you, and you sprint a tenth slower than you did 8 months ago, and they're like, what's going on? Why'd you sprint 10? And not in a bad way, but they're wondering. And it's like crazy how, especially in my sport, how down to hundreds of seconds you become like obsessed with getting better, and we're searching for that extra kilometer and hundredth of a second. And then we go into our Canadian selection races on ice, and it's like, again, it's constant nitpicking and in the best way possible. Like they're not, my coaches aren't doing it because they're like, oh, you're not good enough. They're doing it because they're trying to push me to, try to be the best I can be, and hopefully one day qualify for the Olympics. And they know what my goals are, and that's part of the positive coaching relationship that I know I'm very lucky to have. But it is like you're constantly under scrutiny because you're receiving. I receive Sport Canada funding, so I'm also, I have to be accountable to Sport Canada because they're funding me, and Own the Podium, which gives our sport organization money here in Canada. You're accountable to these people because they're funding your program and some individual athletes. So it gets to be a lot, and you really do have to, like, I make a huge point of celebrating all my tiny wins. And so, like, even last year we had to spend a bunch of time off competing. We didn't travel a lot, so we spend a lot of time out in Whistler, just on our home track in Canada. And I made sure, I was like, my goal every day we train is to leave the track with one positive, because sometimes I'll be like, oh, negative, 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 negative. Like, I could have been better here. I could have been better here. And so if I left and we closed our video review session with I'm really happy with this today, the mood going into the next day was a lot better. So it just, and so like I said, it's just, you're under so many eyes from just your coaches and your teammates and your competitors. Then there's a whole other level at that level of the world. And perhaps I'm very lucky to do a little bit of a smaller sport that we might never get that much of intense media presence. And to be honest, I'm not entirely mad about it.
And with all of that weighing on every athlete, like you said, in your sport, there are obviously dangers that are associated with it. And again, if you are a 10th or 100th of a second off, that's the difference sometimes between first and eighth. And that 10th of a second can just be I don't know if I'm all here today. And with her, an extra centimeter of rotation one way or to less of a rotation the other way, and things start exploding, and that's awful for you. It really is, when you get to this level, everything has to be focused on that moment. If your head is even 1% somewhere else, then it can really mess you up.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how a lot of injuries happen. I mean, in the weight room, lifting lots of weight, sprinting, it's one misstep or one, wandering thought during a power clean, and you can catch weird and, tweak something. And it's not always disastrous, but it's not peak performance. It's not ideal. And it happens, but we definitely train mentally to handle that year round, whether it's on the track or in training, because it is such a grind. And I definitely am one of the ones that I know when my head isn't in it for another run. And we only get about 6 runs leading into a race, which is just under 6 minutes of training. So it's all about the mental prep off the ice. And, there's sometimes where I'm like, you know what, I need to rest my body and just do something off ice visualizations, extra video, etc., that can supplement it. It necessarily can't replace it, but it does help the when I have to call it and be like, you know what, I can't do another. And sometimes whenever I have this, I have a rule of thumb, whenever I'm wavering, that I'm like, oh, I really want to go for another run again, because we can only do about 2 or 3 runs a day in training. I would say some people do more, but it's a lot physically. You're going 135 kilometers an hour with 5 G's of pressure in some corners. It's a lot. It takes a lot out of you. So I whenever I waver, I'm like, okay, you know what it is? I'm like, I need to take a run off. Obviously, in races, I don't always have that opportunity, but I guess this opens up a whole other thought that you know what, you can pull out of a race.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the culture, she's going to push the culture that way. And I mean, I don't know if you want to do that all of the time. Obviously, if it's happening all the time, you need to step back and say why is this happening all of the time? But she's proving that, sometimes you just need to take a step back and take care of yourself, no matter what's going on. And in sport you, there's also human you.
Yeah. Yeah. And human you has to last a lot longer than sport you has to last. So take care of human you.
Yes.
I was going to ask, and you kind of answered it there, but I was going to ask, like on a race day, and I guess this does change the conversation, but on a race day, if you do kind of notice your mind going in a few different places or whatever, is there a technique or something that you do that's like, okay, let's bring it back down to where we're at instead of did I leave the stove on or something like that?
Yep, there's a lot, and I've been very lucky to work with the Canadian Centre for Mental Health and Sport through Canada's like support for athletes game plan, which is something that's really awesome we have access to here. And Canadian Centre for Mental Health and Sport, I'll just say, is available to any athlete, I think over the age of 16 in their intake. It's not always free, but they'll try and match you with someone who best fits, maybe if you have insurance, etc. Because I'm a national team athlete, I do have access to obviously a free amount of sessions, which is a game changer. And I've worked a ton with my sports psychologist, who's actually going to support Canada for the Paralympics, which is really awesome. And we've worked together for a few years now, and just so there's so many. It depends what I need, and I'm very much in tune with what I need. But breathing is a huge one for me. The box breath, it's like in for 3, hold, out for 3, hold. That always focuses me in and like kind of gets me into that, like, what if I'm too nervous, it brings me down. If I'm like a little lethargic, it'll bring me up. Another one is like grounding your feet. So, and swaying side to side is supposed to, I can't remember what part of your brain, but it like calms your brain out of that like panic state. Again, these are all, I'm not an expert, right, but these all work for me.
Yeah.
We do a ton of visualizations and like stuff like that. And for me, I perform best when I'm confident. So all of that prep work and like talking with my coaches every day, etc., helps me build my confidence so that I can perform. Otherwise, if I'm not confident, there's like a little party that holds something back, which is obviously we're fighting for hundreds of seconds. It's not what you want.
Right.
But yeah, so there's all that. Sometimes I like music. Sometimes I don't like music. Like I have no set routine, and like it's just very dependent on what I'm feeling, what the atmosphere is. And you really have to be ready for anything in our sport too. You know, you could be delayed because of a crash, delayed because of weather. It could be raining too much. It could be windy. It could be snowy. You could get your car stuck going up to the hill. This happened, and it's not funny. This happened in our Canadian selection races this past year in October. It snowed a lot up in Whistler. I drive a little Ford Focus, and I had all season tires on. Rookie mistake, but I drove up there before the snow and kind of didn't really have winter tires. So I was like, oh, you know what? They're like M&S. I'll be fine. And I had to park halfway down the hill to the track and text one of my teammates. I'm like, can you pick me up? I'm standing in the parking lot halfway up the hill. And funny side story is I took a video of it and we're like on Instagram. I'm like, so I'm stuck in the hill, blah, blah, blah. And I actually ended up getting free winter tires from an awesome Canadian company.
Oh, nice.
Tire Stores Canada. They sent them right to my door in Whistler. Anyways, that was really awesome and like a super funny thing to share. But like that happened on a race day. So you really just have to be ready for anything. And I think having this, like, I call it my toolboxes. I have all these tools in my toolbox and we develop them over the year and work quite closely to. And it's kind of like, do I need a wrench or a screwdriver? And you take whatever one out you need and and you're good to go.
Just another quick aside, the winter tire thing. I grew up small town Saskatchewan. I lived like in the prairies, and then whatever you want to consider Calgary to be, with the mountains over there, prairie over there. And I've been like, I don't need winter tires. Give me all seasons. I'll be fine. I know how to handle it. And then we finally got winter tires about a year ago. And I have given in that it makes a substantial difference, and it actually helps quite a bit. So I'm very pro winter tire. And this is another argument in that direction for sure. Just one other aspect of this before we get into a couple of other things I want to talk with you about today. If a teammate came to you, because like there's a lot of individuality in sport, but there's also like you have a broader team, a couple of broader teams, and especially when you're going to different like world competitions and stuff like that. If a teammate came to you and did something, or didn't even come to you and did something similar that Simone did, I guess how do you think you would handle something along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, it would be a little bit different just because I think obviously we don't actually we do have a team competition now. So I think like it is valid. It could happen, and whether it be our individual or team event, but I just think showing unwavering support for the person is most important. And like, we're a pretty strong team. We pride ourselves. We're not really well funded in Canada, so we really rely on each other. And we work, like I said, you only get 6 runs together. Like you have to work really closely with the person, and I think you just show them unwavering support. I would direct them to game plan, like I said, in the Canadian Center for Mental Health and Sport, and say like, hey, you don't even have to go through your national, that's outside of our national sport organization. So they don't have to know that you're accessing this. And we also do have a 24/7 through game plan, like emergency support, whether it be by phone, chat, email, etc., which is like for more emergent needs. So I would definitely like kind of just say, hey, like here's your options. Let me know if I can't do it all for you, but let me know how I can help and kind of stuff. And I really think it's important to know what the resources are. And when I was before I made the national team, I kind of was like, there's a really big gap for provincial and like developing athletes in Canada necessarily hasn't quite reached that level yet, and you have to pay for it, which is really tough. And it's like, it's a catch-22, when some athletes need it to make it to the national team to get access to it for free, but are you going to make the national team without it? It's kind of like this, and I'm sure everyone knows mental health support in general is very expensive here. So yeah, I would definitely just encourage them that it's okay, and like it's okay to take a race off and not to feel like they're burdening our team or putting our team out. People get disqualified out of races for all kinds of small technicalities. Like no one's gonna know. It just shows up as either did not start, or if you start the run and crash, it shows up as did not finish. It's not disclosed. I've not started a second run before, and I've had someone who writes a lot about sliding in the States reach out to me, and he's like, hey, like, you good? Saw you didn't start your second run. And I was at the hospital getting hand x-rays. And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm just, at the hospital. Everything's fine. Just precautionary. But like, the thing is that no one's going to know. Like, I think that's the biggest thing. And you can just say like, not feeling it today. It doesn't matter if it's physical or mental. That's between you discussing with your coach. You really just tell the race officials, or the coach tells the race officials, athlete not going. They broadcast it to everyone. And we're a pretty small community too, that if I feel like if they weren't comfortable talking to someone within their own team, hopefully they would also reach out to one of our international teammates and ask, or within bobsleigh as well. We travel a lot with bobsleigh. So I really just hope that they can identify one person that's like at that race stop that week to like confide in and not necessarily burden them with it, but be like, how can I get help? And that person might not know the answer, but they could ask someone of the same nation privately and not disclose who it's for and stuff. So I just really think like that's a long answer, but I just really hope that our team would feel empowered to reach out to anyone and say, hey, like, this is what's going on, or not even, I just need resources, and there are resources available. We're very lucky to be to have them available.
So you wouldn't call them a selfish sociopath then to their face? That's not a tack you would take?
Or on Twitter.
Or yeah.
But no, absolutely. I don't think there's any, like we said, people have not started races because they have an injury, and I don't think that it needs to be disclosed whether it's physical or mental. Or any sort of limitation why. People do it for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah. A couple other things I wanted to chat with you before we get going. And also the tenor of this conversation did change over the last little bit, because when I messaged you the other day about this, it was when I think you quote tweeted the video of the selfish sociopath and whatever. And I basically wanted to just do half an hour of screw these people. But again, I've seen much more supportive messages online since, so I've been able to calm down a bit. And yeah, this conversation I think has changed a little bit over the last 48 hours or so.
Yeah, which I think is good too, because it allows the initial emotion to subside and for people to process really what's going on. And I hope that those that did make a comment have since retracted them, or say, you know what, I've rethought my position. And I just really hope that people just take the time to think. Athletes are on social media too. We're like, you'd hate to see someone saying like, oh, this skeleton race really sucks, and then I like go on Twitter after my race and I'm like, oh, that really doesn't feel good.
Yeah, no, exactly. As far as these games are concerned, one of the big talking points in it from a Canadian perspective has been all the medals so far have been won by Canadian women. And that has been, it's been awesome to see, but also I feel like over the last like 18 months or so, there really has been a, like women's sports exist and it's actually pretty awesome. Is that something that you've kind of noticed another push in? And I guess as someone who like a woman in sports, this feels it feels like there's a big almost movement going on. Is that something you recognize?
Absolutely, and there is a big movement now. What I'm have my eye keenly tuned to is post Beijing. Obviously, we're very lucky to have 6 months between 4 games. 2 Olympic, 2 para. So it's gonna be a heck of a year for sports fans, for amateur sports, and winter and summer. But yeah, I mean, I'm keenly tuned to see if it sticks. I think it's a fad right now, a little bit, a buzzword, and not to say there hasn't been incredible change. Mandy Bujold, who fought at the highest court level in sport to qualify, despite basically being left off the qualification because she was pregnant and on maternity leave when they took results from 2.5 years ago because of COVID. And she fought, and she's like, I was #1 in the world, like right up till before then. And Kim Gaucher in Canada led the charge to allow women to, the opportunity to bring a caregiver and their child to the Olympics and I think like as well, those are 2 amazing Canadian women that really led the charge. And I just really, yes, it's been amazing. And I'm so proud to be a Canadian woman in sport. And it's something we obviously want to teach everyone to look up to. I saw a thing, it was like, dear Canadian girls right now, look up to like all these athletes. And I was like, dear everyone, anyone can look up to a female athlete. It doesn't matter what they identify as.
Right.
Like anyone can look up to us and be like, wow, that's amazing. But I do also have to shout out, like, I would say that the men's, can't remember what relay it was, but the men's swimming relay team, they had an incredible performance. They were ranked like 22 going into the team race, and they came up 4th. And Brent Hayden, who's a longtime veteran, he's like in his late 30s, huddled around with his 3 like under 25 teammates and like gave them a pep talk after they came 4th. And I think there are these really awesome moments. We get caught up in medals, but there's these really awesome small moments that are happening. And like, so also make sure to pay attention to those, regardless of the gender. But I just really, it's awesome. And I really do appreciate that there was like a more even split now for Canadian Olympians we took to the games, which is really awesome. And more female events being added, canoe kayak, whitewater canoe kayak for women was just added. Calgarian Haley Daniels has pushed for that for years and years and years, and she just competed a couple days ago. So I mean, it's awesome just to see, even in my sport, previously only 20 could go to the Olympics, and they bumped it up to 25. The men used to get 30. They've evened it to 25 each, which I think is really awesome, because it was really hard to be in the top 20, out of the 100 skeleton athletes in the world. And some countries, get certain spots and etc. But all in all, I don't want it to end. I want it to stay. And I really think there's a way. Interact with your female athletes on social media, amplify their stories, share their content. People like you having me on here, like you're allowing me to have a voice and that kind of stuff. So there are lots of free ways to support female athletes. If you happen to be in a position where you work at a company, sponsor athletes, sponsor female athletes, that kind of stuff. But not everyone has that position. So I think just, that this is where Twitter is a blessing and a curse, is like, we very much rely on Twitter, Instagram, social media, all those stuff to like, we have to be on there in order to get any traction. And that's where it's so hard, where we're clawing for this media attention, but then it goes badly and you're like, it hurts you. It's like stabbing you in the back a little bit. So be kind, amplify our voices, all that jazz.
Yeah, the social media aspect of it, again, to tie in with the mental health, I have found, and it's actually something I talked to my counselor about, is like, I'm on social media too much and rely on that for way too much of like self-worth and stuff like that. But then if I'm not on it, like I'm doing my own thing now, if I'm not on it, there's that whole stupid building a brand BS that everyone has to do. But it's like, if I'm not on there, then no one knows where I am or what I am doing. But then if I'm on there too much, I want to run into traffic. And so like it's this weird thing. And again, for me, like all I'm doing, I can just sit down here, plug this microphone into my laptop and go. For you, where you have to like kind of deal with all of that and then go out and be one of the top athletes of the human race, that like I can't imagine how difficult that must be.
Yeah, and it's and I'll add on top of that, I also work full time.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's I attest that I've been building a brand, you know, as an athlete for years and years and years, and it's really difficult, and it's, you know, I don't have the 10,000 followers that some of the athletes do, but I do pride myself that I've like organically built something as someone who has no, you know, knowledge and how to build a brand, you know, like outside of a couple courses or webinars I've done. It's just all been organic and trial and error. And a lot of my athlete friends aren't on Twitter, and I actually really enjoy Twitter. It's kind of like people might follow me and be like, she has all these different angles, but it's me. It's like,
right.
You know, I'm watching the games, and then I'm watching The Bachelorette, and then I'm traveling, and then I'm tweeting about Calgary city politics and all this stuff. And it's also connecting me to a lot of awesome people in Calgary and I mean, and beyond. But I would say like I use Twitter primarily to connect to like Calgary community, which is, I'm born and raised here. It's something I'm really passionate about. I want to make Calgary so great. And I think Calgary's so great, despite so many things that are floating around in the media right now. But I just really like, I'm really passionate about that. So it has been an awesome way for me to use my voice. But I do have to like remind myself that like, you know, it's not me. And I've had a couple people that I've known for a long time say like, you know, you're annoying on social media. And I was like, well, that's because it's like me, like business me. It's not personal me. And I don't have time to run a personal Instagram as well.
Right.
So just don't be offended and unfollow me or like mute me, whatever. I'm not offended when I lose followers. I very much like detached from that as well. And I'm just like trying to be more organic with my social and in that regard, and rather than the planned content, all that stuff, which is great. But I think people, again, it doesn't play into the narrative that, you know, that human aspect. You know, you're not a big corporation, you're not Amazon running its brand. Like, It's okay to be a little bit, oh, I didn't post once today, like all that stuff. I think that's okay. So that's kind of been what I've just flown with. And, you know, when things are right, things are right. And I won't lie, I had COVID a couple months ago and I like went off the grid. There was like a month and a half, I think, between my posts. And I was like, oops, hi, I'm still alive.
Right.
Like, so yeah, I mean, it's been nice to just like, but it's been a work in progress because I attest to that. You can otherwise spend hours scrolling and trying to figure out what to post and then stressing about what to post and all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I've just kind of said, hey, when I got something to post, I'll post it.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a good way of going about things. Last one, because I've taken up way too much of your time. How has training going? You mentioned you yourself had COVID. I can't imagine that helped. And with everything that's been going on in the world over the last 18 months, I can't imagine that's helped either. And now I almost feel like the Olympics being on with like off schedule a little bit, but being on now, and then there's Olympics next year as well. Like my own internal calendar is thrown right off. So has that affected things either? That is a long way of saying, how are things going?
Yeah, so I mean, it's taught me to be more adaptable for sure. I was really, really lucky that my dad has a like small home gym in his basement. He's had it forever, or like the last 10 years or whatever. And as soon as like I was at the gym on March 16th, 2020, and then I got the text that was like, hey, like the world is shutting down. You can't come back to the gym. And we hopped right onto Zoom with my strength coaches, which is nowhere near as effective as being in person.
Right.
But at that point, I just felt lucky to have access to a small gym. And obviously like my dad lives alone. So it was pretty easy to like, we cohorted before cohorting was a thing because he wasn't going anywhere. I work from home, you know, it just worked out perfectly. It taught me very much to trust, you know, I've worked with the same sprinting coach for the last 4 years. I've worked with the same strength coach for the last 5 years. So like, it wasn't hard necessarily because I know what they're saying. When I get my program, I know what they're saying. It's hard to get those like little cues and stuff like that. But I kind of was like, hey, like I'll be okay. And I very much had to trust intuitively, like my knowledge. And
Right.
Been around a little bit longer now as an athlete, so I have. If it was 9 years ago when I first started skeleton, I probably would have been lost and not sure what to do. But I was like, great, just rolled right back into this. I have a green space across the house, across from my house, and not sprinting on a track because all the city tracks were closed, but I was at least able to sprint outside somewhere. Yeah, so I mean, and then the season rolled on, and like I spent the whole summer saying, like, what am I training for? We're not even gonna have a season. And sure enough, things opened back up, and they're like, great, we're gonna go to Whistler. And then I was out in Whistler for about 6 weeks, and they gradually started going to a lockdown. They're like, no one else can come train at our high performance center unless you're already in BC. And we were already out there, and I was like, okay, well, guess I'm staying here. And then it really intensified in January 2021. After having COVID and all the restrictions, we traveled to the States. I spent 30 days in quarantine or isolation.
Wow.
Whether it be mandated by, obviously we have the health, government, USA, Canada, Alberta, that we had to fall under. But then I also had our own team regulations, and we got private tests before we came together as a team. We isolated for 7 days at a hotel up by the airport prior to leaving to the States, just to make sure that, we weren't going to get any of our team sick, anyone that's traveling sick, anyone that we're going to sick. Yeah, it was a trip. And then we landed in Denver, and it was like COVID didn't exist. There was tens of thousands of people, and Calgary had just been in that like super long, intense December lockdown. And I was like, whoa, this is crazy. Yeah. But we pretty much just holed up the whole year in our rooms and went to the track and got COVID tested about once a week, once every couple of weeks. And we got kicked out of New York. Long story, but we got kicked out of New York. We were supposed to stay and train. So had to rush back to Canada. We got in right before when we still had the Alberta pilot testing program. So again, my quarantine was shortened a little bit. Yeah, it just was it was crazy. A lot of time alone. I'm lucky I work remotely, like we said, so I was stuck in my hotel room, but I was like, hey, at least I can hop on my computer and still do my job and keep my mind occupied and that kind of stuff. And I did a lot of also podcasts and media interviews and stuff like that, because I was like, what better stuff do I have to do? I'm sitting in a hotel 24 hours a day.
Right.
Yeah. And then, long story short, right after the season, I've been in intense following all the regulations and stuff. Ended up getting COVID. And I mean, it was hard to be like weeks away from getting vaccinated and getting COVID. And you're like, I almost made it. Yeah. It wasn't that bad. I mean, I was still knocked out for a couple of weeks. I was on an inhaler for a little bit.
Wow.
Yeah, right before, just to allow me to transition back into training. Yeah, it was, I mean, I don't recommend it. Obviously, it was horrible. I'm very lucky to be healthy, but it completely decimated my immune system. Now, I hadn't built up my off season yet, so I didn't lose a bunch of fitness. So that was the best part of it, I guess. And
okay.
Then I was just kind of, I had a camp a couple weeks ago in July, and there were times in April I was sitting there and I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get ready for this national team camp. Like, I don't know what my fitness is gonna be. Am I gonna be able to breathe? Am I gonna have long COVID? Like, there were so many spirals of unknown, and am I gonna have long-term issues and all this stuff. And so I ran a couple weeks in our camp, and to come out and be like, you know what, I wasn't quite there yet with my preparation, but I felt super fit. And so I was like, that in itself is a huge win when you stop and reflect and you're like, wow, I didn't think that I would even be able to run in the camp. So yeah, it's been an up and down year, but I really just have kind of taken everything as it comes and been flexible. And COVID, I said, was the last. It's like when people are throwing stuff at you and then they throw the kitchen sink. COVID was the kitchen sink. I'm pretty sure that was talking about mental training. I was like, I can handle a lot now after the last year. And yeah, we'll see what happens. We're supposed to potentially, we don't know who yet, but travel to China in September for the test event, because believe it or not, the Olympics is in February. The only skeleton athletes who have been on the Olympic track are China skeleton athletes.
Oh, so, lovely.
Yeah. So home track advantage, obviously. And yeah. But we get to go, they'll obviously pick certain people from our team to go. Again, we don't know how they're going to pick that, but that's again something that I'm just like, oh, it'll happen when it'll happen. But yeah, it'll be interesting to think about being one of the first sports to go over for the test event in China and how that's going to go and all that stuff. It'll be, I'm very curious how it's going to go, and it'll definitely set the tone for what the next 6 months of sport look like. And obviously our sport is like very specific. The track is very specific versus like some sports, you know, you're like track and field is a good example. In summer is like, you know, a track is a track, and yeah, there's like some variations, but they always go one way around. A skeleton track is vastly different, and everyone is unique and has its little nuances, and you need run volume and you need that preparation piece before it. So it'll be really interesting, and it'll definitely show who is the most like adaptable, resilient, has their knowledge dialed in there, and all that stuff. It'll definitely play to those people versus those that, you know, become your home track. There are tracks on tour you go to and you're like, oh, well, so-and-so's in the mix because that's their home track. So yeah, stay tuned. It'll be interesting.
So pretty chill next few months then. Good. Lastly, any sponsors you'd like to plug, or anything that you're doing that you'd like to get out there? The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. I mean, yeah, so I host with Kids Sport Calgary and Sport Calgary, myself and bobsled Olympian Alicia Risling. We host the Face First podcast, which is basically focused on promoting sport in Alberta and leaders in sport and athletes and all that jazz. So you can check it out through Sport Calgary or on iTunes. It's Face First. It's a little yellow logo with a bunch of sport people on it, but there's that. Yeah, and just a couple of really awesome businesses here in Calgary that are kind of like my core team of strength and conditioning, Vital Strength Physiology. That's who I mentioned. You know, Carla runs it. She's the owner, and she's been with me for a while. She's awesome. And then Coalition Calgary, they're kind of in the same place, same location, but they're kind of my physio, chiro, etc. But they've like, they walk the walk in terms of supporting athletes. They both have athlete rates that, you know, you have to kind of like apply for. And I've obviously been with them for a long time. So I'm now lucky to be extended that small amount of little cost savings, but it all adds up when you're going all of the time to see them. But yeah, I'll shout them out. And I mean, if you want to hear anything else, I have other sponsors on my website. It's gracedafoe.ca. You can head over there and see what's up in my world. I probably haven't blogged in a long time, but there's pictures, sponsors, all that jazz.
Okay. Did I say your name wrong at the beginning? I said Dafoe. Is it Dafoe?
It's either or. Willem Dafoe ruined it for me. Which is actually a really fun fact, is like we're super, super distantly related, like back like five generations or something like that. But someone in my ancestors told me that we're like kind of distantly related, but he used to say Dafoe before he made it big as an actor. And I think he just stopped correcting people, which is what I also do. When I go to get a table reservation, I'm like, yeah, Grace Dafoe for 2. And they're like, oh, great, Dafoe, come this way. And you're like, so it doesn't matter. Long story short,
okay.
I'm used to it.
Well,
not
Grace.
Wrong.
Okay, well, good.
Yeah.
Well, Grace, thank you very much for doing this today. And I'm sure we'll be catching up with you. And I'll be taking up way too much of your time during what's supposed to be a very busy winter for you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. And yeah, follow along to see my adventures throughout the year. It should be an interesting year.
Yeah, no kidding. All right. Thank you.
No problem.